get you to direct your questions to either an individual or the panel as a whole, and I might need to reinterpret for Andy. Are you still there, Andy? I'll move to Q&A. Okay. Would anyone like to begin? Please. So,
Richard, you talked about that link between media organisations and revenue. What we're seeing, I think, at the moment with social media in particular, is there's no link to revenue whatsoever, nor any barriers to entry. How do you see the lack of barriers to entry and no revenue being involved in any of the news, so-called news broadcasts that we're seeing at the moment from the blogs, linking together to create a difference between a credible news source and a blog?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would use the example of the freemium model put together by the Australian, which is an iPad or an app version of the Australian itself. In fact, I don't know whether the other panelists have done the same, but I've paid for that over the past few months. I took the first 3 months free trial, and I've paid 3 or 4 months now. And I don't believe it's adequate. I don't believe I'm getting what I should be getting for a number of reasons. Most of which, of course, is there's a lack of a link to Twitter, so I can't look at that. And I think was raised by Tim. Was that Twitter plays into this quite as a blog site. So I can't, in fact, create an ongoing relationship with my Twitter followers for a story that I see from that specific Australian blog. So there are fundamental problems with that, and I think that model is not necessarily working well either, even though News Limited says that model is working nicely, and the other majors are not using the model at all at this stage, although I believe Fairfax is going to a freemium model as well shortly. The question, I think, revolves more around revenue itself, is that right, and the generation of revenue by bloggers and others. I think Andy's point was interesting, and I'd like to know whether Andy, in fact, is a paid blogger, whether he makes revenue from this, been doing it for 6 years. That would be a question I would have for him. Because like News Limited and Fairfax, I'm struggling to see where the revenue is going to come from if it's not traditional or normative advertising. There doesn't seem to be any other space for it.
So, Andy, Richard was just responding to a question about, in a sense, the business models of blogging and how that might sustain quality content. And Richard actually wanted to throw you and ask whether you actually got a revenue from what you did, and maybe in a sense how you could respond to that resources and quality question was put you on mind.
So, in terms of a revenue basis for blogs, in terms of my own endeavours, I basically rely on the kindness of strangers, and there has been some revenue generated in that fashion, but I don't have a kind of a business model as such, and developing one poses all sorts of problems. I think that that's a crucial issue in some ways, because essentially what I'm doing could be described as a labour of love or hate, depending on your perspective. And I acknowledge the fact that good investigative journalism actually requires resources. So I'm not sure how that kind of activity can be sustained outside of having very keen volunteers. I'm aware of several kind of projects, blogging projects, that have attempted to kind of transform themselves into semi-commercial operations. Probably the most successful example that I'm aware of would be something like, not in Australia, but in the US with the Huffington Post, and it's kind of ironic that in that case there were a whole range of writers who were volunteering their efforts to build the profile of this blog, which was eventually sold large sum of money. I don't think the blog has actually got much of it. So otherwise, I mean, I've occasionally had reasons to appeal for funding, and the only thing I can really offer in exchange is do people find what I'm writing is of value, is of interest to them, and sometimes it is, but obviously that's very, it's not a stable occupation at all.
If I could just make 2 points in response to the question. The first is the question itself, the way it was worded, which was, well, how do you tell the difference between a credible source and a blog, this is a dichotomy that I take objection with. I think that to actually say that you have this strong dichotomy between something that's credible because it's got a masthead behind it or a blog is a false one. I will tell you right now that there are a lot of blogs out there written by someone on a voluntary basis that I will have no hesitating in trusting much more as being a credible source than something with from a major media publication. I think that I don't think the Australian blogosphere is quite as developed yet as it is in other countries such as the US, but I certainly think that that's a false distinction, and that just because someone is unpaid, it doesn't actually make them a non-credible source. And in fact, in many ways, the fact that you have so many volunteers out there putting their time into this, in fact, I think can increase their credibility, because there's not necessarily a profit motive there behind it. Not that I actually think the profit motive is necessarily a bad thing, but you actually see so many successful bloggers do this without being paid. Andy's an example. I mean, our Menzies House blog, none of our contributors or editors are paid. I think we ran one competition once. But we still get content, we still get readers. The same with other blogs. I think that, yes, there is a role for the freemium model. I'll be interested to see how it plays out. Personally, I would pay money on any single Fairfax site that bloody annoying news video doesn't come up anytime I try and load something. I would pay just for that to stop. I think that there are other things that you would pay for in a freemium model. I think the Australians got one, and I think that as technology develops, new things will come up that we may not have thought of right now. Many of these, tech startups 5 years ago were losing money, would say, this will never work, it'll never make money. And yet it's developed, they've developed new solutions. So my response is, one, I wouldn't make this dichotomy. I think that, and the more blogs grow, the more they will continue to be a source of credible news, credible opinion. I commend the voluntary effort, and I think that they show that voluntarism works. Donations work. People actually do give money for things they like to continue. I've donated to blogs before because I like what they do. They've asked for money to help keep running. So I think it's going to work. But in terms of the professional side, I think that, one, the freemium model is still in early days. It seems to be working at the moment. Online advertising does bring in some revenue. And as we evolve and as time sort of progresses, that I think you'll see more positive developments there.
If I could just pick up on that question and just ask another question, if I could cut in. I wonder what Derek's suggestion of, a future, APC 2.0, where they sell to particularly the social media community their services as, in a sense, gold star verification. And I think about those models in the United States where businesses were getting, reviewed in terms of their business practices and things like that. And that was actually a successful model for many years. Do you think that, would Menzies House sign up to such a thing, for example?
I think my personal opinion is, I certainly do agree that people should be able to sign up to gold star verification schemes. I think it would be better if there's some competition between them, so people can actually judge which verification scheme they want. My personal opinion is that both the traditional and new media outlets, it can be a bit of a cop-out. One thing that I found in Australia is that very often people will, editors can wash their hands of this. That was a press card council issue. Whereas in the US, where they generally have internal yet independent ombudsmen dealing with these sort of questions, I think that there can be an argument made that it's more robust in terms of responsiveness. As for, I think that from the Menzies House perspective, we're happy to stand by our content. We're happy to stand responses with our comments, and we see no need for independent verification because we stand by our own record. But if others want to pay money for gold star verification, then obviously that's their right.
Well, I should say that they can't wash their hands of it, because that's in fact one of the underpinnings of the system, that by joining up you agree that in the event that something can't be resolved at an earlier stage, and for example, the complainant understands what the publisher puts and says, okay, I don't have a complaint, or on the other hand, maybe there's a retraction or apology. If that doesn't work and it goes to adjudication, the publisher is actually required to publish the outcome of that adjudication, whether it likes the decision or not. So, that's an important part of the system.
Another question for our panel?
Can I just make one more comment on that earlier question? Is that right, in relation to what Tim said, I think the difference between subscription and donation comes into play here. And you talked about donation. In fact, the question is, am I making a donation to News Corporation when I buy that monthly premium edition? So is it a donation that keeps News Corporation going, or am I subscribing on the basis of subscription? I guess this comes to the gold standard as well. If you can opt in and out with a subscription like this, are you likely to stay in rather than pull out because it's a donation and you see it in different ways? I probably don't have an answer to the question, but I'm concerned that we're using different words or different phrases here for the same thing. It's the extraction of income from it, or money from us, to keep these things running.
Judy.
Perhaps all three or four members of the panel, what did you think of the media's coverage of the release of the report?
Media's coverage of the report.
Okay, I'm happy to go with that first if you like. Yeah. I thought it was pretty dreadful. Go with that first, is that all right? I can come back to you. Yeah. Is he keen to see what I have? I was also concerned about the number of comments that were made by academics writing in various journals or various outlets who had not attended the media inquiry days, specifically here at Sydney University. So they were writing about it from an ideological position rather than from an observational perspective. I thought that was appalling as well. The media coverage, I think, was pretty much as we would have expected it to be. The Murdoch press was on one side, Fairfax and the ABC on the other. But I think also that probably there was an underpinning, if you like, agenda for them now all coming towards the idea that the Press Council will work. And it was wonderful to hear various the corporate executives from Murdoch talking about how wonderful the Press Council is now that this inquiry is underway.
Well, in fairness, I probably should point out that News Limited has actually been quite a strong supporter of change. In fact, predating the announcement of the inquiry, as our chair had also tried to initiate some of these changes before the inquiry, but they certainly has ramped up since that time. Look, on the question, I agree that in fact I think the issue was far better covered through online media. The release of the report, that's one of those examples of where you did get that diversity through online coverage that you didn't get in print media.
The comment that I would make, I think I broadly agree with what has previously been said. Look, to be honest, you can't really deny that there is an ideological underpinning of this report. You actually read through it and it's, get Murdoch, stop him writing bad things about climate change legislation. What disappoints me is the response from the academic community and the intellectual community, whereby you had writers, remember David Marr and co, silencing dissent under Howard. When I was a student here under the Howard regime, every sort of day there were posters out about how the evil Howard regime was silencing dissent. Now that you have a report which is generally viewed as being disadvantageous to conservatives, all these so-called champions of free speech who went out and, how dare Howard silence free speech, are silent. I think that's disappointing. just because they disagree with someone, they are no longer they are no longer willing to stand up for freedom of speech. The core of freedom of speech has always been the right of someone who you disagree with to speak. And I think the cowardice of large sections of the academic community, and there are exceptions, I think it was, Naomi Wolf is a good example of, somebody who is generally on the left, and, I hate everything that the Australians doing in terms of a lot of their policies, but, they have a right to free speech, so there are clearly exceptions. But I think overall it's so many commentators who have previously been so vocal about free speech are so silent on this particular issue that I find very sad and disappointing.
Tim, I might just say I think that's just wrong. The overwhelmingly the response to the Finklestein Inquiry has been that people have disagreed with its recommendations, that there's very few people who are actually in support of a government regulator. They have the different reasons for saying that, and they have different views on various parts of the recommendations, but a number of those commentators, those academics, have come out and actually said they don't agree with that. They think it should be something that should be done by the industry, by the Press Council, but not by a statutory regulator.
Look, sure, a number of academics have come out against elements of the report. I think my comment is more at the deeper issue, which is the freedom of speech one, where there hasn't been that level of commentary. Most comments have been, well, we need regulation, this is the way necessarily the way of doing it. The broader issue of freedom of speech, and as it applies to this current political context, is where I think the response has generally been disappointing.
Do you want to respond?
A couple of things I'd like to say.
Actually, let's do that again. Yep, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. In terms of the media response to the report, I don't claim to have conducted any kind of, proper survey. My initial impression was that much of the coverage was somewhat alarmist, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There were things within the report that became immediately the centre of attention and focus and debate, which is good. I also recall having seen the Media Watch report, which again has its virtues as well as its faults, and I speak from a particular perspective which is largely, I think, marginal to the dominant discourse regarding these issues. But one of the things I wanted to add was, I think Peter asked, would Menzies House be willing to take part in some kind of, also strive for some kind of regulatory agency which might be able to accord sites with some form of verification. And I think it's worth keeping in mind that as well as government regulation of online content, there's also market or commercial regulation. So for example, it's sometimes difficult to gain access to my blog from university websites and the websites of various companies, not only in Australia but around the world, and that's because it's been surveyed and classified by particular software developed by companies like WebSense and others as belonging to the category of violent and extremist material. So, and that will block access from particular sites, including universities, which is somewhat odd, I think. But the other point is that regarding that in particular is I try to contact WebSense and ask them, what is the basis for their categorisation. Simply I didn't think it would do me much good, but I thought I might be able to at least elicit some kind of response as to whether or not it was because it contained images of Nazis or call for violent revolution or something of that sort. I received no response. So I guess as well as there being regulation, I think it's important to look at who's doing the regulation or and on what basis. And it's important also to understand that there's government and there's non-government forms of regulation. So that's my point.
I have many questions, but is there an audience question before we take it? I guess the question I'd like to introduce to the panel really relates to in a sense, the relationship between the political background with the Leveson Inquiry in the United Kingdom and the difference here. I mean, one of the arguments that a lot of media scholars have made for a long time has been that Australian media is so terrible because of concentration of ownership particularly, and a lack of competition. Whereas we haven't seen the sort of very bad behaviour, you know, phone hacking, illegal behaviour, payoffs to public officials, which I think is safe to say are egregious behaviour in the Australian context. It's the more competitive English tabloid context that we've seen that. The salve that's often presented in the report is there's going to be a much more diverse and pluralistic online media that is living off rags, but it's been the highly competitive nature of the online media, of the offline tabloids in the United Kingdom that has led to bad behaviour. And I wonder if, you know, is Finklestein maybe on a right beam with regards to regulation of the online space more than talking about whether the print media in Australia has been badly behaved? It might be more a question for Derek to
well, I think to some extent that's not necessarily a valid distinction. If the same kind of content is being generated offline and online, there's just as much reason for the online content to actually subscribe to a set of standards and submit itself to independent complaints handling as there is for offline. But your point's a good one about the difference in competition, and maybe in Australia it's more the case that the challenges are there from, say, the movement, the evolution of media platforms and the demands in publishing material online, constantly having to update material, 24-hour news cycle, decisions about whether or not, you know, as Andy said, about whether or not you allow comments to be anonymous, whether or not you pre-moderate, post-moderate, all of those kinds of demands and mean that there's a risk that what you go to publish is doesn't follow the same processes, standards as it once did. So I think there's a number of media companies that are very well aware of that, but I'd say that those are more the pressures rather than the ones that you describe. So there is a distinction between the UK and Australia, yes.
Yep. There's a gentleman at the back.
Yeah. Well, I was just interested in the fact that, like, with the internet, there seems to be like an assumption that if you're looking on a blog, there's going to be an element of subjectivity to it, which is not as regulated as, say, a newspaper. But I just found it interesting just to look at the idea of where you would draw the line between entertainment, for example, or just opinion, and journalism in an arena which would be on the internet. Like how can you actually define where it's worth regulating?
Yeah, so this is a question about how you actually draw a line about, you know, where you start the regulatory process, particularly between opinion, entertainment and journalism, particularly online where there's been assertion that blogs are more subjective. Is that something like that? Sure. Should we let Andy go first?
Yeah.
Andy? Okay, you want to talk to that? Okay, John.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, the answer to which somewhat depends on what people are looking for and what they actually regard as being useful or accurate. I know the report makes reference to studies that have been done regarding Australian attitudes towards online content as opposed to established news media, and the ranking of blogs is quite low. I guess, one of the things that I've found is having, in regards to particular subjects such as the contemporary Australian far right, the fact that if you are a journalist and you're looking for information online, as many journalists do about this subject, you'll encounter my blog. And so I've been contacted on numerous occasions by journalists asking for essentially background material and they're kind of relying on me to provide accurate information. And, you know, I like to think that I do. I guess the other complicating factor is that I'm not engaged in the simple reportage. I'm a critic, and I also like to try to inject a certain degree of humour into my depiction of the answer to these boneheads and so on. And I hope that kind of comes through. And I think it's both an advantage and a disadvantage in terms of, I guess, the perception if you want to be taken seriously, you remove that kind of commentary or opinion from the site. At the same time, I think it's part of what actually attracts people to content, especially with regard to my blog. So, in terms of, I mean, I know that when I'm engaged with the media and I read The Age or Sydney Morning Herald, or I watch the news, I try to do so as an informed participant. So there's kind of, I guess, two aspects. One is the content that's being produced, and then there's the critical faculties of the consumer. And I think without wanting to, I guess, place undue emphasis on the ability of audiences to participate in that process, I think it's worth acknowledging. And ultimately, I guess, you know, the consumers, so far as the consumers of news media, have to try and develop, you know, forms of intellectual self-defense, which I think is what Chomsky described as being, that allows them to engage critically with media, whether it's newspaper, television, or blogs.
Yeah, look, I think the comment's a really good one, and it's certainly something that that people are struggling with at the moment. The Finklestein Inquiry looked at it, in New Zealand they're looking at it, in the UK they're looking at it, and this question about whether you define something as news and comment or journalism is one that to which there's not an answer. I think from where the Press Council sits, we'd say that we cover news and comment, and we're not interested in entertainment per se. That's not what we're seeking to cover. When it comes to the actual platforms or the sources, we probably wouldn't be interested in, say, or we wouldn't be interested in Facebook in that aspect of social media. We're interested in news and comment where it's found, though, and it's difficult to say draw a line and say this is in, this is out. There isn't a definitive answer at the moment, but maybe if you can actually identify certain things that should be in. So, for example, we would think that we've been talking a lot about blogs, but of course there's online media that's not blogs, whether that's, say, subscription newsletters or other forms of online media. We'd say, for example, that Crikey should be in such a system because it deals with news and comment, it deals with that seriously, it's got a set of staff writers, etc. And indeed, you might have read that that we've reached agreement for them to come into the Press Council. Well, there's a number of different pointers, and it's hard to work it out, but I suppose that's the benefit of a system in which you opt in, you're not required by law to be a part of something.
I think there are a number of ways to interpret your question, and it's a good question, especially relating around entertainment. And my first academic answer to it would be the deeper the rupturing of existing social structures, the more we will move to micromanage, so we'll start drawing lines under all sorts of things. Whereas in terms of globalisation, we're shifting away from those boundaries and trying to remove the existing boundaries of language, culture, and all sorts of other elements that come into play. So that would be my first comment on it. So the more this deep rupturing occurs, the more change, the greater the change, the more we tend to tribalise and look for micromanaging. On the second side of it, I'd say it's very difficult to distinguish between entertainment and news, especially as some of you are working on or know already of the News Corporation's most recent annual report. While it has News Corporation as the text, it has Australian American Idol and all sorts of stuff going on top there as the main focus of the report. And if you open the report front cover, or the inside front cover, it goes on for a few more pages, the Wall Street Journal appears on a blog on the left-hand page, and other aspects of Glee, The Simpsons, American Live with Megyn Kelly appears in terms of Fox News, if you like, aligned with entertainment. And the next page has even more interesting things. The various football teams and others that are owned by News Corporation, and ironically Sons of Anarchy, which I think News Corporation probably runs as a corporate anarchist biblical track. I think it's probably the most relevant television we could watch today to see what the corporate world really does. What?
It's a great show.
It is a great show. Sorry, I'm not misinterpreting there. It's a brilliant program that in fact I think shows up the whole idea of the corporate structure and what corporate, so the irony is in the Sons of Anarchy. But those issues I think come into play, and it's a very difficult question to answer. It's not a simple question, but there is a delineation between news and current affairs. And you only have to look at whether it's, news and entertainment. You only have to look at the 6 p.m. news tonight on Channel 7 or Channel 9 and try and extract which are serious news stories and which are not. And on that basis, I don't believe that Crikey is actually a serious news medium either, but then that's something for the Press Council to deal with.
Just brief. I mean, I agree. I think that, your question actually gets to the heart of the matter. Where do you draw the line between news and entertainment, and where do you regulate them? To which my answer would be you can't, and so you don't. I think it's impossible to draw the line. I mean, where does a current affair fall today tonight? I mean, I think if anyone who's watched Frontline will be able to give you your opinion where that falls. But as I don't think it's possible at the moment, but as Facebook and other sort of sites, subscription news says, the lines are going to become even more blurred. And so it's a spectrum. You can't actually draw any clear lines. So I think rather than actually having an appointed council of elders actually trying to make a line, and people can always opt in and out, that's certainly preferable. But rather than actually having any clear lines drawn, even if it's based on something as fuzzy as the old legal ruling on pornography, which is, I know what I said, rather than actually trying to draw these distinctions, Andy mentioned, the critical capacity of consumers. He said he didn't want to put too much weight, overemphasize it. I will overemphasize it. I think that's the only way forward. I don't think Australians are idiots. I think they can recognise when something is subjective, trash, or when it's good journalism. They can recognise when something's entertainment or not. Let consumers decide what, and I think that's the only, forget my ideological views on this, but it's the only practical way forward where it's actually becoming more and more impossible to draw these distinctions.
So I might just take one last question from Ariadne there.
It's more of a comment.
Well then you've got to end it in at least a token question.
All right, I'll give you that now. Basically agree with what Tim and Richard are saying, but I also think what this shift is about a generational shift in terms of consumption of news and information. There have been a lot of studies in the US showing that a lot of young people, their main source of news is the Jon Stewart show, and other influential shows in Australia like The Chaser, and then we've got a project now on Channel 10. And last week, I don't know if you noticed, but Charles Firth, formerly of The Chaser, started The Roast on ABC2, which is a daily news summary show, tongue-in-cheek. So I think it's about thinking more about where these generational shifts are happening as well in terms of, and how credibility and authority are given in different ways to news as well.
Okay. Well, that sounded like a comment. Does anyone want to jump in with a final statement? Andy, you talked about entertainment mixed in with your serious right wing. Do you want to just jump in there? There you go.
Well, I guess I'm not sure if I'm as entertaining as Alan Jones is. I think he's can be very entertaining on occasion. I do think that in terms of online media consumption, as far as I can tell, it's largely based on Facebook analysis the audience is fairly young, but it's fairly diverse as well. And so I think there is this shift, but generally I think, in my experience, if you can, there are simply new ways of engaging with audiences, and especially young audiences. I don't think the opportunities I've had to engage in both in terms of blog and elsewhere, there still remains for many like a really passionate engagement with politics, with news, with commentary. That's a matter of perhaps format, but also just addressing those concerns. And I guess the significant shift for me is the ways in which, given opportunities to participate in token fashion, young people and people generally tend to kind of gravitate towards that. So, I mean, and I think that comedy appeals because it tends to punch official pretensions, and people understand generally that there's a lot of lying and manipulation and falsity in both news media and contemporary politics. And comedy works because it kind of unveils those truths. So, I think comedy is good and it should be used, and I don't think it's necessary to. I think serious points can be made in a comic fashion, and that's a good thing. So.
I think Eric and Andy both hit the nail on the head. I mean, not only is John Stewart, where most young people get their news, it was actually the most trustworthy news source. In a poll, a poll actually said that John Stewart's show, The Daily Show, a comedian, is more trusted than CNN, more trusted than Fox News, more trusted than the national network news at 6 p.m. So I think that's a great point as to the blurring between education and entertainment. But also what Andy said about engagement. I mean, what you're seeing, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of, is rather than the media being a one-way system of information delivery, it's become two-way engagement. So you actually have a blogger engaging with a commentator, and you have that two-way nature going. You have a media organisation's Facebook page where you actually have that dialogue happening. So that dialogue, I think, is going to continue. You're going to see much less top-down information distribution and a lot more two-way engagement, which I think, once again, points to my previous point of the impossibility of being able to regulate or draw those lines.
Look, the challenges of online media is absolutely the most interesting aspect of the work that I do. But let's not forget that vast numbers of people get their news from traditional media sources. They get it from the Daily Telegraph in print as well as online. They get it from Channel 9. They get it from commercial radio. And there's almost an assumption here that those things don't matter anymore. They matter to people who get their news from those sources. They matter to people who are caught up in a news story. And when something happens and they're caught up in the news and they're part of something in the Daily Telegraph or in the local paper in their country town, it's far more important than what someone might be saying on a blog. Now, yeah, we welcome what blogs bring us, what online media brings us. All of us use it, but it's narrow thinking to dismiss traditional media, including print-based media, just yet.
I'll just make a couple of comments. Probably one coming back to Glenn would be that probably the most important business model that could be used here would be The Economist, whether it's weekly print version or its online version, plus its other I'm not sure what it calls, I can't remember what it calls it, but you can get on
Intelligence reports.
Intelligence reports, yes. Whether that's been I'm not sure, but it's certainly probably one of the better business models for the early 21st century. The second point I would make is that I think probably the most interesting feature in the News Corporation annual report is Peter Griffin as citizen journalist. You can see that up the back there. Actually, the cartoon character from Family Guy with a microphone in front of him with a news reporter, supposedly with a coat and tie, talking to him. The idea, and I think this comes to my introduction, between journalism and public relations. And the Finklestein report, I don't believe, goes far enough into looking at corporate journalism and the idea of where corporate journalism lies in relation to what we are talking about here in terms of blogging and traditional journalism. And the idea that corporate journalism now plays an enormously important underpinning role for all journalism. I think if that had been covered in more detail or thought about in more detail, we might have slightly different recommendations coming forward.
Well, what I might do is invite you to thank our guests in the usual way for a very stimulating set of talks and questions, and we will pick this up online perhaps. We can talk about it more interactively, asynchronously. So, thank you.